Viewers, there has been a dramatic escalation regarding what the United States of America is saying about Russia's possible invasion of the Ukraine. The US has now said that Vladimir Putin may intend to launch an invasion of the Ukraine before the end of the Beijing Winter Olympic Games, and it has subsequently asked all its citizens to evacuate themselves from the Ukraine within 48 hours. The embassy of the United States is also being emptied at the moment, and there is a dramatic escalation. We've been tracking this for weeks now. The US has been claiming that Russia is mobilizing its forces along the Ukraine's borders and intends to launch an invasion. The Russians have been denying this. They have said that their only problem is the inclusion of the Ukraine in the countries that comprise the NATO alliance. And now we are at a level of threat that we have not been, according to the United States, since the Cold War. This is a big escalation, and we have a guest now joining us who will give us a greater view into what is happening. From Odessa in Ukraine joins Sergei Panashuk. Mr. Panashuk, thank you so much for speaking to us on Republic in India. We'd like to ask you, first of all, the US says that an invasion of the Ukraine by Russia could be imminent before the February the 20th. What can you tell us about what you feel on the ground? Is it a possibility?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Actually, the situation is very concerning, and nobody here actually doesn't know what will come next, because we are listening to the news and we are getting all the information from there. But the warnings came from the outside, from the other country, because Ukrainian government now saying that Russia is not going to attack. They are also urging people to stay calm. There is no mobilization yet here, no military mobilization, but people are joining into our so-called territory, civilian territory defense, and they are training. They are training how to handle a firearm in case of the possible invasion. But generally, attitude that people are calm here yet, because the war is going on for like 8 years, and we kind of getting used to it. But still, there could be any possible development.
Sergei, I'd also like to ask you, the NATO forces, particularly America, has sent about, if I'm correct, 11,000 troops to the Ukraine. You're saying that mobilization is not currently happening, but do you feel that there is a readiness in the Ukraine for something that may be imminent and inevitable?
Yes, mobilization, general mobilization is not happening at the moment, but as I said before, the war is going on for like 8 years. So the army is, they say that they are prepared for any outcome, for any possible outcome. And the difference between 2014, when the war started, and now, that now we have a more professional army.
So, like you've been correctly telling us, Sergei, 8 years ago, Russia launched an invasion and took Crimea from the Ukraine. Since then, you're saying you have a more professional army. There has been a lot more expenditure of Ukraine towards its security, hasn't there? And can you see a difference in that on the ground as well? Has more resources been dedicated towards security than other areas of the economy, for instance?
Well, Ukraine has spent about 2% of its GDP for the army. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot, but it's not enough, because, of course, Russia has much more resources. But our Ukrainian aim is to defend, not to attack. So, and defense, it's easier than offensive. I think they could have done more than they did, but still they do whatever they can to defend from possible invasion.
Right. Sergey, one more question. I'd like to ask you, essentially what's been happening is that Russia has been talking about the Ukraine, how it should not be included in NATO. What is the feeling on the ground? Because the last we heard, there seemed to be split opinion. Should Ukraine align itself with NATO, or should it give in to Russia's demands? What is your feeling from on the ground?
The opinion is really split because people, like older people who were born in Soviet Union, who were raised in Soviet Union, of course, they feel some kind of connection to Russia, and they see NATO as a threat. But younger people, they are more Western orientated, and they feel that NATO is more like a friend or a mean of defense. So this opinion is really split between these age groups, and also it is split from, like, in Western Ukraine, I think maybe 90% want to join NATO, and Eastern and Southern Ukraine, maybe 40 or 50% of population wants to join NATO.
Sergey, also in terms of how the civilians are dealing with this current scenario, of course you're saying that large-scale mobilization is not happening, but are precautions being taken to maybe evacuate the civilians from any strategically located cities? Kiev, for instance, is there anything on the ground that tells you that the government in the Ukraine is preparing for perhaps the worst?
There is one sign, there is warning sign, because the papers and documentation from General Prosecutor's Office were transported from Kiev to Lviv to Western Ukraine. This is a very worrying sign, actually. No evacuation of people at this point, but they are evacuating documents and papers.
Right, that's Sergey with us from the Ukraine. Sergey, stay with us. Another question that I want to ask you is about America's influence over there. Have you seen American troops, say for instance, on the ground, or are they still in phases of deployment? Because we've seen a lot of sophisticated weaponry has also been brought in. I'm sure it takes some time to get it to where it needs to be, but are you seeing that on the ground?
No, I don't see it. I don't see it in Odessa, especially. Actually, I'm not aware about American troops in Ukraine, because as far as I know, NATO is not going to interfere with soldiers. I heard that UK troops might be sent to Ukraine to evacuate Great Britain's embassy. But this is only what they do. They are not going to be engaged in any fight, if there will be any. With regards to the weapons that were transported to Ukraine from UK and from US, I think they are now trying to deploy it where it should be. But that's probably it.
Sergey, you said something very interesting. You said that the older population in the Ukraine that was part of the Soviet Union may have leanings towards Russia, but the youngsters there are more aligned maybe towards the West. What does Ukraine think about Vladimir Putin? Because apart from national aspirations and affiliations, it also seems to be about leaders, and you cannot extricate Putin from this entire crisis. So what do Ukrainians think about Vladimir Putin?
Well, it's a difficult question. It's also, I mean, it depends from person to person. Again, if it is also split, because older population may feel a bit different, but the younger people and people in the West, they have a very certain attitude, and this attitude is dictated by what was happened in 2014 and what is happening for 8 years. So,
right, that's That's Sergei Panashuk. That's Sergei Panashuk with us from Odessa in the Ukraine Republic, keeping you ahead from on the ground in a location where there is the potential for a flashpoint. At least the US believes that a Russian invasion may be imminent before February the 20th. That is when the Beijing Winter Olympics end, and the US has prepared its citizens in the Ukraine for perhaps that eventuality. Sergei, thank you so much for speaking to us in India and on Republic.
Thank you for having me.